Before the accusations, before the trials, before Salem becomes infamous, something strange was already happening. Healthy people suddenly became sick. Children screamed in terror. Entire families reported terrifying visions. No one understood why. Not the villagers, not the doctors, not the church. For centuries, the mystery remained unsolved. Until historians began looking somewhere nobody expected. Not at witches, not at demons, but at the grain growing quietly in the fields. Because one of history's most terrifying poisons may have been hiding there all along.
Imagine waking up in 1692. Your hands burn. Your body twists without warning. You see a dark figure. It speaks your name. The priest says you are cursed, but the real evil is already inside you. It has been there for weeks, growing, silent, invisible. Stay with this, because the story goes somewhere you will not predict. Something microscopic sparked the trials at Salem, and for centuries, nobody saw it. But first, step back further, into medieval Europe.
Pick any century. The winters are brutal there. The soil is thin and frozen. Most people are one bad harvest away from starvation. One grain kept them alive: rye. Not wheat, not barley, rye. Rye survives where other grains rot. It laughs at frost. It grips thin soil and refuses to die. Millions of people depended on rye bread. Every table, every morning, every season, every year. Now here is the bitter part. The grain that saved them also carried a horror, but they did not know it. They could not see it, because the enemy looked exactly like food.
In the fields, after a cold, wet spring, something strange appeared. Small, dark growths on the rye heads, purple-black, almost like misshapen seeds. Farmers noticed them. They called them wolf's teeth, spurred rye. What they were looking at was a fungus. Its name is ergot, Claviceps purpurea. Ergot replaces the grain kernel with its own dark body. From a distance, the field looks normal. Up close, some heads are wrong, but not wrong enough to raise alarm. So the farmers harvested it all. They ground the dark kernels with the clean ones. They baked the flour into bread. Then their families ate it for weeks, for months, through entire winters. And nobody connected the bread to what happened next, because what happened next looked nothing like food poisoning. It looked like damnation.
First, a tingling in the fingers, in the toes. People call it a warmth, a prickling. Then the warmth becomes burning, real burning, unbearable burning. But it is winter. Their skin is cold to the touch. The fire is coming from inside their own bodies. Then come the seizures. Muscles lock. Limbs disobey. Bodies convulse on the dirt floor. The neighbors watch. The priest is called. Prayers begin. But the prayers do not stop what comes next. The visions. People see things that are not there. They hear voices accusing them. Their behavior becomes strange, erratic, terrifying. And then, in the worst cases, the gangrene. Fingers blacken, then they fall off. Whole limbs die while the person is still alive. Now, imagine witnessing this in the year 1100. You have no microscope, no germ theory, no concept of fungal toxins. What do you think is happening? You think God is punishing someone. You think the devil has entered a body. You think a neighbor made a deal with darkness. Because what else could explain burning skin and twisting limbs? This is the moment fear replaces medicine. And fear is where history gets written.
The year is 994 AD, southern France, Aquitaine. 40,000 people die in a single outbreak. 40,000. Their bodies burning, their limbs blackening. Historians would later name it St. Anthony's Fire. Not because anyone understood the cause, but because victims traveled to the shrine of St. Anthony seeking relief, and some of them recovered, but not because of the saint. Because at the monastery, they were fed different bread, uncontaminated grain. Nobody made that connection, not for centuries. The answer was sitting on the table in front of them every single day, but they could not see it. Outbreaks struck again and again. France, Germany, England, Scandinavia. For 500 years, communities suffered and died, and every time the explanation was identical. God's wrath, the devil's hand, punishment, witchcraft. The real answer remained invisible. And now the story takes a turn you did not expect. Because the compounds inside ergot do more than poison the body. They hijack the brain in a very specific way. The year is 1938. A Swiss chemist named Albert Hofmann works in a laboratory. He studies ergot derivatives, compounds pulled from that same dark fungus. He synthesizes something new. He labels it LSD-25. 5 years later, he accidentally absorbs a tiny amount and experiences the first recorded LSD trip in history. Vivid hallucinations, reality bending, a terrifying but undeniable alteration of consciousness. Now go back to that medieval village, those families eating contaminated bread. They were not consuming pure LSD, but they were consuming ergot alkaloids, the same chemical family, in wild, unpredictable doses, week after week, month after month. Their visions were not imagined. Their hallucinations were chemically real. Their paranoia was chemically induced. Their bodies screamed to their brains that something supernatural was attacking them, and their culture had only one framework to explain it: possession, curses, witchcraft. This is where everything locks into place, because now we must go to Salem. January 1692, Salem Village, Colonial, Massachusetts. The winter has been long and brutal. 2 girls begin behaving strangely. Betty Paris, 9 years old. Abigail Williams, 11. They scream without reason. They convulse. They twist their bodies into impossible shapes. They say invisible hands bite them, pinch them, choke them. The doctor examines both girls. He finds nothing physically wrong. His conclusion? The evil hand, witchcraft. Within weeks, more girls show the same symptoms. Accusations follow, arrests follow, trials follow. By the end of 1692, 19 people are hanged. 1 man is pressed to death with stones. Hundreds more rot in prison. Now jump forward to 1976. A graduate student named Linda Caporal publishes a paper. Her argument is precise and disturbing. She compares the Salem symptoms to documented ergot poisoning, convulsions, burning sensations,
hallucinations, paranoia, delusions of persecution. The match is almost perfect. Then she looks at the geography. Salem village sat in a low, swampy marshland. Rye was the main grain crop. The spring of 1691 was cold and wet, perfect conditions for ergot to bloom. The affected girls lived on the western side of the village. The accusers, the sufferers, the families who showed no symptoms, they lived on the eastern side. Different fields, different grain. Then the accusations slowed in the summer of 1692. The symptoms faded. That summer was hot and dry. Ergot cannot survive hot and dry. The pattern is hard to look away from. But the debate is not settled. Not everyone accepts the ergot theory, and the skeptics have real arguments. First objection. If everyone shared the same bread, why were only some people affected? The answer is uneven contamination. One sack of grain could be heavy with ergot. Another sack from a nearby field could be clean. Exposure depended on which grain reached which house. Second objection. Some accusers seemed calculating, strategic. They targeted specific victims with precision. Hallucinations do not produce organized witch hunts. This is where historians push back hard. And honestly, the pushback is fair. Ergot may explain some of the symptoms. It may not explain all of the social machinery. The most honest position is this. Ergot did not cause Salem alone, but it may have been the biological trigger, the kindling, the initial spark. Then, fear, religious pressure, and community tension fed the fire. One fungus in one wet field, and centuries of consequences followed.
Here is the part that stays with me. These were not ignorant people. They were parents, farmers, neighbors. People trying to survive another winter. They baked their bread. They feed their children. They worked the same field their families had worked for generations. And they had no idea that something was growing inside the grain. Something invisible. Something powerful enough to twist the mind itself. When the fear came, they searched for someone to blame. A witch, a neighbor, anyone. Because the real culprit could not be seen. And that is the tragedy. 19 people died not because of magic, not because of evil, but because a fungus hiding in a harvest looked exactly like a curse.
That is the part that does not leave you. And here is the strange coda. Ergot eventually gave something to modern medicine. Ergotamine, an ergot derivative, is still used today in migraine drugs, in medications that stop deadly bleeding after childbirth. The same chemistry that poisoned medieval Europe now saves lives in delivery rooms. That is not a redemption story. It is a complicated truth, because the same fungus that inspired LSD also inspired witch trials. The same compound that stopped hemorrhages also started mass hysteria. The lesson is not that everything has a bright side. The lesson is harder than that. Unseen forces have always shaped human history. Biological ones, social ones, psychological ones. Invisible pressures that drive entire communities into madness. And we rarely recognize them until centuries later. The people of Salem did not lack intelligence. They lacked information. And that gap between what people feel and what they can explain, that gap is where history's darkest chapters get written, every single time. A microscopic fungus may have altered the fate of 19 souls. It may have terrorized Europe for 500 years, and nobody saw it, because it hid inside the most ordinary object imaginable, a loaf of bread. So the next time you hear about monsters or curses from the past, Pause. Because history's darkest mysteries often begin with something no one questioned. Something ordinary. Something invisible. Something already inside the house.
History is full of stories like this. Moments where ordinary people faced dangers they could not see. And sometimes those hidden forces change the world. If you enjoy uncovering the forgotten history behind everyday food, subscribe and join us. Because the next story begins with a simple ingredient, one that quietly helped build an empire. And the people who stood in its way paid a terrible price. The story is waiting for you right now. I will see you in the next one. Thank you.